right, welcome back to another episode of Vancouver Real. My name is Mike Zaremba, and always with me is my big brother Andy Zaremba.
Hey everybody.
And on the helm is Omed Pakbin.
Yeah, hello.
And just a little introduction. Vancouver Real is a spin-off podcast of London Real, which is hosted by Brian Rose out of London, England. And we started ours earlier this year. And we broadcast it out of Float House. Float House is a sensory deprivation and flotation center here in Gastown, Vancouver, BC. And so we use that to host the show. And also Omed is our technical support as well. And he does a very popular YouTube channel, which actually features some videos by our guest today. It's called Omega Point. So definitely check out Omega Point on YouTube to see his latest and greatest creations. Very inspirational 2-3 minute videos, some very profound people. And we're just going to get right into it today. This is one of those episodes where, it was our goal to speak with our guest today right from the get-go. He's one of the ones that are on top of the list. And for him to be here today, it's
just a huge honor.
Huge honor, very humbling. And today we have on with us Dr. Gabor Maté. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Maté, he is a physician and a very accredited author of 4 books, Scattered Minds, which is about attention deficit disorder, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Their Peers, and In the Realms of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addictions. That was published in 2008. And this book revolved around his work in the staff physician of the Portland Hotel Society. Do you still work there as well?
No, I haven't worked as a medical doctor for 3 years now. I'm too busy traveling, speaking, and working on or at least thinking about my next book.
Okay. So obviously this, we're broadcasting out of Gastown, which is in the downtown east side, more part of the gentrified area of the city, which is changing rapidly, which we'd love to talk to you about once we get rolling as well. You worked with patients that were suffering from mental illness, drug addiction, HIV, sometimes all 3 of them. And after writing The Realms of Hungry Ghosts, you were introduced to ayahuasca, the spirit plant medicine, and you did some work with that, leading multi-day retreats for addiction treatment that resulted in some observational research studies being conducted out of UBC and UVic, University of Victoria. You've also appeared in several documentaries. And so I actually wrote down my introduction because I didn't want to miss anything. You're a world-renowned speaker, giving lectures and presentations for organizations such as TEDx and MAPS, just to name a couple. You speak all over the world. You are in high demand, and personally, and from the 3 of us, we can't thank you enough for accepting our invite to our humble podcast. And Vancouver Real, we try to just provide content through a medium which is unfiltered, unrefined, and unedited, really. So thank you so much for coming on Vancouver Real.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. It's our opinion. We had a podcast last week where we had a gentleman come on and he had a group called Man Talks, which was trying to create a group for people, for men and women to come to just discuss contemporary issues with men in our society and to open up a little bit and engage in different conversations about what's like to be and what's expected. And one thing that came up a lot was role models and mentorships and stuff like that. And I think it's really safe to say for the 3 of us that you are, between your videos online, your books, your lectures, that you are definitely a huge role model for a lot of people. Is that something obviously you're aware of, but do you put much thought into that, or is it more about the content?
It's an interesting question because I fully know the value of what I put out into the world in terms of my lectures, videos, books, teachings, the retreats, the healing I do with people. So there's that role modeling. But you might not want to model yourself too much on who I am if you follow me around my personal life. In other words, there's sometimes, for me at least, still quite a gap between what I know and what I know how to impart and the wisdom that sometimes comes through me, and then how I act or behave in my personal life. So that's why I as much as I appreciate and I value what I'm capable of teaching and even modeling, at the same time I know that nobody should confuse me with the best parts of myself.
I think that's a important point to say, that even with somebody with all your experience, all of the research you've done, all the publications you've done, and you still have just as much faults as anybody else, you know?
Well, so faults is one way to put it. Another way to put it is unresolved issues or areas where I haven't completed myself.
Sure.
I haven't been fully in touch with my true nature. Areas where there's a contradiction between what I know and how I live. And I appreciate what you mean by the word fault, but there's kind of a judgment in that.
Yes.
And we all can't help formulating judgments, but it's best to approach both ourselves and others with compassion. And really, the areas where we might say we're at fault, really, if you use the word fault in its geographical sense, as a gap, then you might say, yeah, there's a gap there, but not in the moral sense of a sin or a...
It's not your fault. It's not,
It's
a poor word.
The fault is not your fault.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Exactly, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that the influence that you've had over people as a whole has been fantastic. So any kind of faults that you might have seen in your personal life, I think might be kind of balanced out in another way. And for myself, personally, the first time I ever was exposed to you was through the movie, the second Zeitgeist film.
Oh, yeah.
And you were speaking about premature babies.
Yeah.
And at the time, actually, my daughter was born premature. She was 28 weeks, born at 28 weeks, 1.9 pounds.
Yeah.
She spent about 10 months at the Children's Hospital in the NICU there. And as you speaking about how the premature babies, if you're not holding them and touching them, that they'll actually die. So as soon as I heard that, and luckily that was a few weeks in, my daughter became one of the most cuddled babies in the NICU. And myself and my partner were just every day, she'd be there in the morning, I'd be there in the night, and we'd be holding her like just close to her chest. And she had a pretty traumatic birth experience. So I think that's a big part of the reason why she actually survived. And when I saw you speak about that, it clicked right away. And I'm like, of course, that's what any human being needs on this planet. They need to be nurtured, they need love. And that's what I gave to my daughter. And I think that's why she's still here.
That's so wonderful to hear. And what strikes me right away is you see this film online, or you saw it in a theater somewhere.
Yep.
Now your daughter, everything goes well, is going to be a mother at some point. And she's going to have children.
Yep.
And then 2 generations from now, or 3, when I'm long gone, and even you might be long gone, the impact of you seeing that film will still be living in the world.
Exactly.
In how those generations will then hold their kids.
Exactly.
Because how we're held is generally how we tend to hold our children.
And that's kind of the principles, we've raised her around, is just being as loving as possible.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of it was because of your influence. And, she's still very developmentally delayed. She has a lot of different things that we're working towards. Luckily, in this country, we have a lot of support, which is great. But the good thing is she's just a happy little kid. She doesn't really know any different.
That's great.
And she's just being a happy 4-year-old, running around doing her thing. She's not speaking yet, but she's getting there. So it's it's just a blessing to been able to be influenced by you in that way.
And again, I didn't make this stuff up. I mean, I learned it from others, so this is how it's passed on. And so I'm glad to be part of that transmission.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that, like you're kind of alluding to, with the ability of the internet to communicate information, that's how, humans, we seem to learn kind of like that. Like first we got to get the information, understand it, process it, and then we can kind of start applying it. And it does take time, right? And it's a constant work in process.
I had when I was in family practice, and I had desires to write, but I hadn't written anything yet. And there was always this urge, and I had this patient who was a very well-known Canadian poet. His name was Warren Tallman, and he was, he knew Allen Ginsberg and all. He was really fine.
Did you write about him in the book Realms of Hungry Ghost?
I didn't.
Oh, okay, because there was somebody in there that you were kind of...
No. Well, Warren was a professor at UBC and a poetry teacher, and he had his own struggles with life. But Sunday I said to him, he came to the office, he says, Warren, I want to write, but I don't know what. And he said, along the lines of what you just said, he said, you will write, he says, when you have something to teach the world.
There you go.
And so then I kept that phrase. I wrote it down and I kept it in a drawer in my desk. And it's when I actually began to understand things in a different way. Then I thought, okay, now I got to write.
Yeah.
Now I have to transmit this knowledge to the world.
It's amazing how doing a simple practice, like just posting that note somewhere, those words, and you just exposing yourself to them repeatedly, it actually makes a shift. Like if there's something, if you want to change something, just bring attention to it, and it will probably grow. If it's appropriate for you, it'll probably grow within you almost. It'll just kind of start coming out.
Yeah.
And, your work, you've covered like things like addiction, child development, how stress affects the body, and also now, and psychedelics, in particular ayahuasca. Now, all these things are really easily interrelated too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny how all your works kind of, I don't think you probably planned it that way, but the topics you
you're
discussed.
right. There's no planning. It's just how it unfolds.
Yeah.
Like the ayahuasca, which is the last thing you mentioned. I never planned it. Didn't know anything about it. It's only that after my book on addiction came out, a lot of people kept asking me about it, until I was just called to find out about it. And when I did and had the experience of it, right away I could see how this could help people with addictions and with stress issues, or anybody who wants to get to know themselves. Again, it's not the only path.
No.
But it's one of them, and to me, it's a very powerful one.
Do you think, I was kind of thinking about this when we were initially in communication with you a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I started listening to your books on audio, and it seems like pretty much everybody has like underlying junk and there's things to deal with, and that's again a poor word, faults and junk. That's not the best word for it, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And there seems to be this common underlying thread through our whole society everyone's dealing with different issues. And have you ever put in the thought of like what is the cause of like this kind of cultural underlying
pain
or suffering?
Well, you're asking me about my next book. My next book is going to be called Toxic Culture.
Wow. Yeah. Talks to the culture?
Toxic.
Oh, wow.
That's the title, Toxic Culture. Now, I haven't written the book yet, and I'm not even sure that it's quite in me to do it, but that's the topic I'm going to be addressing. I just need to give myself, speaking of attention, I have to stop traveling, speaking, and running all over the place, and stay still long enough to see if the attention will allow that material to develop. Yeah. But that's the very subject, is what is it about this culture that makes so many of us unhappy, sick, alienated from ourselves, unkind to others, unkind to ourselves, frustrated. Yeah. And of course, what it is that contrary to this idea of human nature, in a movie that you mentioned, Zeitgeist, we discussed the issue of human nature. Is there human nature? So there's one idea of human nature, which is what this culture promotes. Is that human beings are by nature selfish and competitive and aggressive and just out for personal gain and domination.
It's almost like a misinterpretation of Darwinism. Like people have misinterpreted what that was all about, kind of.
It's a misuse of Darwinism, exactly what it is. Now, there's another view of human nature, which is that there is no human nature. That we just sort of a tabula rasa, or which means an empty slate on which you can write anything you want. So this used to be one idea, and particularly in the 40s, 50s, there was this idea of kids, you can just train them into anything. You can program into anything by behavioral programming. So that basically we're empty, we're devoid of any internal nature, so it's whatever we happen to learn. But there's a third view of human nature, which is so on the one hand you have this view of competition, aggression, on the other hand, this empty slate. There's a third view of human nature that we're actually wired in certain ways. We're wired for contact, for love, for connection, for generosity, for connection with the larger whole, beyond the small ego. We're wired for universality and all that. And then whatever conditions interfere with that is what creates the dysfunction. So then from that point of view, if you have a society that promotes selfishness, that promotes competition, that promotes aggression, that promotes people feeling dissatisfied with what they have, that always says more and more and more, that always says that people are only worth what they produce or what they own, or it's only matter that matters, it's materialistic, so that our form, whether you're pretty or handsome or
perfect,
toned or flabby, that's what defines who you are. Well, if there's a human nature that's quite contrary to that, then creating a society that goes against human nature is what creates the suffering. So I would say that what creates the suffering is that we live in a completely unnatural society that actually tramples on what it means to be a human being, and that's the essence of suffering. And there's so many ways in which our society does that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And if that is so against the nature of humanity, then why would it have gone that way?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And the answer is that it didn't always go that way. That if you look at what we call primitive, but again, if you use the primitive not in a sense of pejorative, but in a sense of primative, like the first is coming first, prime.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at primitive societies from that point of view, you see that primitive societies actually had a lot more of these values embedded in their culture than we do.
Yes.
So that in the natural state, this is how people were.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
And the further we got away from the natural state, the more you start to have these distortions. And you can probably trace that to development of production and agriculture,
Yeah.
and what we can call surplus. So that now it was no longer about just living in the land and in nature, but now about accumulating stuff. And then as soon as we have accumulation, and then you have the initial split between those that have and those that don't,
and defend.
and the defense of that
Keeping
possession.
what you have.
Yeah, and then, you know, in other words, it's with the development of class society. Now, I'm not saying that was a mistake. That wasn't a mistake. It had to go that way because we didn't know any better.
Yeah.
You know, so we weren't conscious. I mean, it's like being in a Garden of Eden. You're not conscious of what you have and what you may lose. You know, and at some point, we're expelled from that Eden. And all of a sudden, now we have to become conscious. So I think what's happening now is that capitalist society is reaching almost the very extremes of that of that view of human nature and that practice where a few can control everything. And this is not happening only in a village or a city or a country. It's happening globally. And it's increasingly more like that, which also means that more and more people are asking the questions that I'm being asked here today, which is how come?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, there's the increasing extremity of control and possession. We talk about the 99% and all that, but there's also growing consciousness that this is not somehow helpful to us. It's not healthy.
I was thinking, in terms of the way we are today as a society, in terms of the technology that we have available to us, like the internet, the way we can disperse information, the way we do
Right.
to set up a podcast like this and get your message out to more people.
Right.
All of this wouldn't be available if we didn't have the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, all these things.
Absolutely.
So it almost seems as if it was a necessary part of the evolution of humanity to become more connected in a sense. I mean, there's, technology like phones and things like that can be kind of a double-edged sword for sure. It can be a huge distraction, but at the same time, it does connect a lot of people.
Well, there's no question that each stage of society creates something positive for humankind. So you can say that a feudal society is a step ahead, at least, of slave-owning society.
Yes.
And then capitalism is a significant step ahead in terms of what it liberates, in terms of people's capacity to produce and to create from feudal society. But we should never think that any particular stage is the end of history.
Yeah.
And as far as the internet is concerned, it's an incredible tool. We don't have to discuss or debate that.
Yeah.
But if we actually look at how it's used, look at all the people that are addicted, look at all the people that are totally hopelessly caught up in it. And in Hold On to Your Kids, which is our book on child rearing, there's 2 new chapters in the latest edition on the digital age.
Yeah.
And when we point out, and when I say we, I mean my co-writer, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, and I point out that when to go back to your daughter, Mike, right? Sorry, Andy, Andy, you're Mike. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay.
So to go back to your daughter, Andy, her need for connection and contact, that's her paramount need. Now, there's a lot of people around a lot of kids around whose needs for connection and contact with parents are not met these days because of the breakdown of the extended family and tribe and because of the stress on parents. Now, what does that mean? That means they're going to use whatever technology is available to them to serve their need for connection.
Yes.
And now the internet becomes not a means of exchanging information, but of connecting. So now you have Facebook, where people have quote unquote friends, and where people quote unquote like each other. So that so that which are attachment words. In other words, so in other words, now the internet goes from being an information highway to being a connection highway amongst people who are immature, desperate for contact. And that's why it's so addictive. And so now you have something that in itself can be very positive, but for a lot of kids it becomes very negative. And then of course it also becomes a forum for all kinds of ways of people hurting each other.
Sure.
Like bullying and
the
sexting and all that kind of stuff.
So what you're saying is, it's like anything. It can be a great tool.
That's right.
But at the same time, don't allow it to fill a void.
That's exactly right. So whenever we're using anything to fill a void from the outside, we're going to create trouble for ourselves.
Yep.
And that's exactly what's happening. So the internet, for a lot of kids, it fills the void that's missing, that's present in their lives owing to lack of connection and contact.
Right. So even thinking along those terms, if the internet is a way of potentially a tool to educate and spread the word of what it takes. For example, when I saw you on Zeitgeist, I was just like, well, that's what I need to do. That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
That tool actually helped me, So you have all these people who are addicted to the internet, addicted to different things. Well, they're probably going to be addicted to anything. There's going to be some other thing that they're addicted to. At least they might be, you could be exposed to something like what you were talking about, which actually could help aid their evolution as well.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. If I had to gauge the effect of the internet overall on kids, though, I would call it these days negative.
Yeah.
I think there's other ways of teaching. And I don't know. Who's that Japanese guy or Korean guy with that weird...
Gangnam Style.
Gangnam Style.
Gangnam Style.
Yeah.
Well, that's been seen by how many? Okay, so Zeitgeist has been seen by I think 20 million people or 21 million people.
Yeah, I know.
And Gangnam Style has been seen by 2 billion people, which means that almost actually over a quarter of the world's population has seen Gangnam Style.
Yeah.
Which is...
It's pretty useless, really.
It's nonsense.
It highlights exactly. I think that's a great example of highlighting exactly the state of where we are.
Yeah.
And how we kind of talked about. You talked about like this consciousness coming to arise, this awareness of like these things aren't good for us. That's still a pretty minority.
Yeah.
And, it's just how it is. But it's hard to once you get exposed to. I'll say, for lack of a better word, a certain level of truth.
Yeah.
It's really hard pressed to ignore that and go backwards.
If the openness to truth is within you.
Sure.
You're totally right. Because to go back to human nature, then I think truth is a part of human nature. I think there's a part of us just wants the truth.
I agree.
In fact, not only just wants it, we are the truth.
Yeah.
So if there's openness there, and then you receive the truth, then it's just really hard to go back. Even if you fall back into old patterns, as I certainly have. You just don't forget, but that openness has to be there. So, on any issue I can think about. Look, I was in Saskatoon just a few days ago, giving a 2-day workshop to a First Nations group, the Saskatoon Tribal Council. And when the 2 days were over, 5 people from a particular community native community asked to speak with me, and they were just desperate. There had been 2 suicides in the last 2 weeks and a suicide attempt, and they were just burnt out. These are the leaders, these are the people who are supposed to provide support to others, and they were just burnt out. What can we do? So here's the truth. The truth is that in Canada, in this advanced, industrial, rich,
one of the most
society
affluent countries
in history,
Yeah.
we have people living under conditions that most people can't even imagine. Desperation, despair. One of the counselors at this little meeting that we had, she said, I can't take it anymore. She says, these 2 deaths, my son's death, and her son died not long ago. And my brother-in-law was nearly killed yesterday. Apparently he was beaten up in Regina and nearly died. Well, we have no idea how people live in this country. And so you can present this truth to people. You can even have our Prime Minister cry crocodile tears in Parliament about the residential schools.
Yeah.
Jesus said, there's this famous phrase of Jesus where he says, the truth shall liberate you. But that's not how it begins. He says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will liberate you.
Right.
So the truth by itself cannot liberate you.
Right, correct.
You have to know it. And there has to be that openness there.
And kind of tying back into, that third thing of human nature you discussed about how, we need contact, we need touch, we need a community and love.
Yeah.
I was in Peru this summer doing a retreat there. Okay. And the head shaman there, his name is Don Howard Lawler, an amazing man from Kentucky.
Okay.
And he was speaking a lot about this civilization in the Peruvian Andes called the Chavin people. And their whole culture was kind of based around a very loving, caring, and they actually used the sacrament Huachuma or San Pedro was a major part of their culture. Uh-huh. And this was like a culture, a whole civilization that had no real leader or hierarchy in that regard. It was more like share the knowledge, share wisdom, share everything. And that's, that's very concise and summarized, but that's more or less what it was about. It's very fascinating. And I think that our underlying nature, I heard a really cool quote on another podcast, and the guy was saying how our default is bliss. And how if we take away all of the programming we've had, all the cultural influences, all of our parental influences, and shed all that away, and are just left with almost like our essence, it appears to be like a very peaceful, calm kind of state. But when you start influencing and adding all these experiences and good and bad, and on top, well, good and bad, okay, that's what kind of, this is where, and it just manifests in the world we have today. I think the external world is a direct reflection of our internal worlds, and we know this isn't sustainable.
And vice versa.
Correct. Right.
The Buddha said that with our minds we create the world, but I also think that before with our minds we create the world creates our minds.
Sure.
And then that's the mind that we create the world with. But that bliss that you mentioned, well, that's Andy's daughter.
Right.
In her natural state. It's almost like the infancy.
Right.
That's why that innocence of the Garden of Eden. I'd be interested, by the way, maybe later to hear more about your retreat.
Okay. Yeah. It was. I'm going back in December as well.
What do they use?
Ayahuasca, Huachuma, and also Vilca.
Okay.
Vilca is like a traditional form of DMT snuff.
Okay.
Apparently,
yeah.
It's not like something you do every day, but the ayahuasca retreat, that's what I did. It was five ceremonies over 10 days,
okay.
And just perfect in my mind of how, like, I've done it in BC as well, where it's kind of a weekend warrior style, which has good intentions, but to physically remove myself from the city here, having the time, being in the jungle, which is a massive feminine energy, you can literally palpate it.
Right.
Eating the proper food and the people, with the support of the people that I was with.
Yeah.
It's everything you could have hoped it would be and more.
That's fantastic. I'm interested personally. I lead retreats myself with the plant, as you're probably aware. And we create this community for a week, so it's not a question of coming for one day and then going home. We go away. It's in another country. It's in the jungle, and there's a group process that happens around it. But what I haven't done is taken myself off and just do it for myself.
You got to.
You know, I do it for others.
That's
Yeah.
why, like,
Yeah.
we were, we offered you to come for a float.
Yeah.
Same thing. Like, as you're trying to develop your book,
Yeah.
the float tank is just like everything is gone.
Yeah.
You're in a void. It's in my mind, it's a physical manifestation of that portal into the unmanifest, like what Eckhart Tolle talks about.
Right.
The portals into the unmanifest and the power of now.
Well, I'll take you up on it for sure.
Yeah, it's a great place just to kind of, you want to shed away all this crap.
Yeah.
And just be there with whatever your essence is, and,
Yeah.
and work with that. Because at first, your mind's going to be kicking in, and anxiety, and then once you realize, though, you have that shift of like everything's okay, and I'm choosing to be here.
Right.
You can kind of let go.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because I've always resisted. I mean, I've been offered floats before by yourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, you've offered it.
We will
a couple
drag
years
you
ago.
in.
Yeah.
You know, and somebody, I was up at Whistler recently, and somebody started a float.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know Louise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
We
Louise
know her.
she came to one of our ayahuasca retreats.
Oh, wow.
That's why she ended up starting that.
Right.
Wow.
It's a long story, but
Interesting.
I can let you tell her about that.
Yeah.
But the point is, she invited me up, and but again, you know, like I'm too busy, I can't do this, you know.
Yeah.
And so here's the commitment. So when my running around stops in mid-December, after I come back from my upcoming retreat, and until then I'm really busy. But when I come back in December, early January, I'm going to be around to write my book.
Sure.
And I'm going to begin by coming down here and doing a float.
All right,
Float.
sounds good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And Hannah's been
Well, we
with
got
us
it
a few-
recorded now, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
that?
We have it recorded now, so now you
Yeah,
get to
no,
come.
I have to do it.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
committed, yeah.
Well, you know what you said was interesting because I just took a course myself actually, and they spoke a lot about resistance.
Yeah.
And they said that they were saying that resistance is actually the first step towards transformation.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And you know, you said to yourself, I actually listened to one of your talks last night. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
But you were speaking about how, as a doctor, you're always running around taking care of the next patient, and you're always looking for the next patient, and
Yeah.
you'd be sitting at home waiting for your pager to go off because you'd want to go treat somebody.
That's right.
It seems like it's in your nature to take care of everybody else.
It's not in my nature. It's what that is childhood programming. It becomes, well, you know, you can use the word nature. You know, we talk about our second nature. But when we talk about second nature, that's an interesting phrase because it implies there's a first nature.
Yes.
So it's my second nature to do that.
Right.
My first nature is actually to allow myself to be taken care of
Yes.
as an infant.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and eventually then to take care of, but not just to take care of others. So how does somebody develop the second nature? Because if your parents are very stressed and in trouble, and for either circumstances beyond their control or because they're not conscious enough, they cannot take care of themselves, and in my infancy my mother could not, then a child develops the second nature of, in order to make this relationship work, I have to take care of the other. Mm-hmm. And then the caretaking becomes your survival mechanism.
Yes.
Because, see, if you weren't taking care of yourself, your daughter would feel very insecure. How she would try to increase her sense of security is by taking care of you. And then that would become part of that would be her second nature.
Yes.
Then she would always form relationships and go into work where she's always taking care of others. And then she feels very satisfied because now she's getting the contact that she's needed all along. But it's a compensatory mechanism. Are you following what I'm saying?
Definitely.
Like, in other words, it's a compensation, it's a coping mechanism. So for me, taking care of others became a kind of, and that's just not for me, a lot of other doctors and so on, you know, and caregivers. It's a second nature. It's how we learn to cope in the world, and therefore we can't imagine ourselves otherwise. And so to receive care, you know, and I know it sounds absurd, but when I talk about it, it's so clear that here I've led a whole number of ayahuasca retreats for people, which are people find transformative, and their lives are changed, and so on. And I've rarely ever, and I've actually not gone for a retreat myself where I'm just receiving and not giving, which, when you think about it, is backwards.
Yeah.
It's still part of your old programs.
It's my programming, yeah. And even when it comes to accepting this offer of a float, where you know, I'm just not going to take that time for myself.
Well, the funny thing is, part of getting in the flow tank is actually making that time for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And the nice thing is, we take care of everything for you. So when you
Yeah.
step in there, you don't have to worry. You know,
Yeah, I know.
It's timed. So you're going to get out after your 90 minutes. You can shut off your phone. You can do whatever you want, and that
Yeah.
is your time. It really is a gift to yourself.
I know it's that, and when you think about it, there's a kind of an underlying belief, and I'm totally clear on this when I work with other people. Is, do you believe that you deserve that gift?
Yeah. Worth.
Are you
Self-worth.
worthy? Are you worthy of that gift
Yeah.
of time? Are you worthy of being given to?
Yes.
You know,
It's
Yeah.
amazing how many people struggle with that. You know,
Yeah.
I'm the same.
Yeah.
I'll purposely spend extra hours here doing things that are important, but can they wait? Can I go home and make some dinner and go to sleep?
Yeah.
You end up, I don't know,
Self-sacrificing.
and actually
Yeah.
it manifested fully 6 weeks ago. I had a microdiscectomy in my back just because I wasn't going to the gym, doing the core exercises I should be doing for my strengthening and keeping myself, and I think, back problems are severely tied with stress as well.
Well, absolutely. There's a guy called John Sarno. I don't know if you know his work, but he's actually a back specialist.
Okay.
And he's written about that. I write about it in terms of every aspect of health, so that really what was going on is that your body was saying no when you weren't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hence the title of my book, When the Body Says No.
It's so
If
clear.
we don't say no, the body will say it one way or the other. And the question is, are you going to listen?
Yeah.
Or the body's going to have to send you another more serious
Well, now you were
message?
forced to listen.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And so I'm lying there at Lionsgate in North Van,
Yeah.
waiting for my surgery, which happened really quick because I got some nerve damage in my foot. That's what prompted me to go
So they
in.
had to have it right away.
Oh yeah. And so I'm lying there, I didn't want to listen to music or surf the web or distract myself. So I'm just lying on the gurney looking up at the ceiling. And you're just, all this stuff is coming in and thinking how now my physicality is now challenged. And
Yeah.
as a young man, that's a very difficult thing to swallow and kind of
It's part of your self-image.
100%. I come from an athletic background. I studied kinesiology in university, so
Right.
movement and exercise is so, like, I get so much from it. Like, I get the endorphin rush and all that jazz. So
Yeah.
you need to, and so when that was sinking in, it's humbling for sure.
Sure, and it goes to the very heart of how we see ourselves. I have a man who's a former patient of mine when I was in family practice, but a couple years after I left, I came to work in the downtown Eastside, and sometime in the next several years afterwards, this one was driving in North Vancouver actually, and flipped his car, quadriplegic. And I have no idea how people deal with that, because I myself,
Yeah.
I'm so identified with my body. Like,
Oh,
who
yeah.
I am is my body. I like the fact that I can exercise and
Yeah.
stay healthy and do this and that, and
Yeah.
a lot of pride in it, and
Yeah.
really strong identification. Well, all of a sudden, you have to start asking yourself, so who am I really?
Yes.
And if you totally identify with the body, and then when something like that happens, it's devastating. And I mean, look at how difficult it was for your self-image when you had a reversible,
Totally.
painful, but
Oh, yeah.
painful but completely reversible problem.
Exactly.
That's the other thing about our society, is we identify so much with our bodies. We identify so much with our bodies that people suffer extra when the body won't serve them the way they need, the way they expect it to. And also, of course, we glorify people with beautiful, strong bodies.
Yeah.
And
Massively.
And we deride people. We mock people whose bodies are not as ideal, or whose bodies don't work as well.
Yeah.
Well, in that line of thinking, one of my pieces of advice to Mike when he hurt his back was, well, part of your physicality is limited right now, but what else can you develop? What can you do? What can you work on?
Yeah.
And I thought of, right off the bat, Stephen Hawking's.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, a very extreme example.
Yeah, yeah.
But look at his mind. Look what he's able to do.
Yeah.
So, and I think if we can focus more on, what you can do as opposed to what you can't do,
Yeah.
it can be still very inspirational to people.
Yeah.
But it's easy to see how people can, just spiral down
Sure.
into a deep, deep depression if they're not able to have either whether it's support or just the personal ability to kind of develop that awareness, that consciousness of, okay,
Well,
what else can I have?
One of the happiest patients I've ever had was a woman who was quadriplegic. She was in a car with 6 other people and it flipped, and everybody else walked away.
Whoa.
And she spent the last couple of decades of her life as a quadriplegic. Totally socially connected, happy, confident, good sense of humor. It was always a gift to visit her.
Right.
And then a couple of young guys, quadriplegic, they killed themselves.
Yeah.
Because they just, and it wasn't about the quadriplegia, it's about how we relate to ourselves and how we know ourselves. And she had the wisdom and the gift, I suppose, to know herself as not being identified with her body.
Yeah,
exactly.
And they didn't.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to predict how I'd respond to that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I'd hope I'd have the wisdom.
Yeah.
Knock on wood, if anything like that happened to me, to know that I'm not that, and then I'd really have to accept help.
Yeah.
You'd be forced to.
And I'd be comfortable with that.
So maybe don't try to manifest that happening to get that result.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think what you're also speaking about, Eckhart Tolle speaks a lot about, and that's acceptance.
Right.
Accepting where you are.
Right.
If you can't accept your position, eventually we are in these bodies that are impermanent, and they will go away.
My only beef with Eckhart is, it's not a beef. I have his book, The New Earth, which I've dictated.
Sure.
Vast swaths of it onto my iPhone, and everywhere I go I read him. And every time I read him, it's like the words are fresh.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's not that I have a personal beef with him. It's that I have an envy. And the envy is that he wasn't seeking this experience. It just happened to him.
Yes.
It happened to him. It was by grace. And he had this transformation. Now, then he had to go to work to integrate and incorporate this awareness so that he could actually understand it, embody it, and eventually he was called to teach others.
Have you met him?
Yes, I've met him.
Yeah.
I've seen him speak a couple of times and I met him once. But it happened, whereas, and he himself says that for most people, that transformation is not an event, it's a process.
Sure.
It's a process.
Yes.
But God, I'd like for that transformation just to happen to me.
Right away.
Well, just to happen like that.
He speaks about why that happens to him, or why it happened, and he says one of the fastest ways to transform is through great suffering.
Yeah.
And that's where he was.
Yeah.
In his book, he talked about he was suicidal. He was ready to take his own life.
And he totally had to surrender to it.
And he surrendered to it.
But I don't know how to surrender.
Surrender is the opposite coin to ego, is what Terence McKenna has said.
Yeah.
I found with ayahuasca, that was one of my first time ever drinking. There's 2 big things I got from that first night, and one was how every single thought not only directly affects my entire being, but actually affects the entire universe. Yeah. Every single thought. It was very, very clear.
You had that experience.
Yep. It was very clear that every thought I would have, it was a thing that is connecting. There is an underlying connection. And then the second one was, so it was really getting really strong, the initial kind of kicking in. And I was it was starting more intense, and my head got really intense, and it was on the verge of purging.
Yeah.
And I was getting extremely physically uncomfortable. And just before I was going to purge, I just completely surrendered. Like my whole body went limp, my head went down, and I just gave in. I just gave up. And immediately the purge sensation subsided, and it was gone. And then as soon as I kind of would regroup myself and come back and start thinking too much, the vomiting sensation would come back, and I'd have to surrender again. And that whole night was just me just surrendering over and over and over again.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question though.
Yeah.
When did you have this ayahuasca experience?
This first one was last summer.
The one you're describing now?
Yeah, last summer.
When did you have your discectomy?
I had it 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
Today.
You know what the next question is? What happened in between? You had all, you had all these great transformational insights. You had this deep experience on planet ayahuasca, and then you come back to planet Earth, and you start behaving like you'd never had that experience.
Yeah.
Well,
No, that's not unusual. I'm just asking what happened for you.
No, I think you speak really well of this. Is how you come back and you're kind of in that post glow for maybe a week or two.
Yeah.
But that one night of experience is not going to trump 30 years of conditioning and layers of emotional crap and all that.
Well, I find what makes it really difficult is coming back to society and have to deal with work, and you have to get back to that routine.
The culture
and
we live in is not conducive.
Yeah.
Okay, but surely. But the question is, so what is it that we have to do then, that when we have those insights and those experiences, and what is it we have to do to actually integrate that into our lives? Right. That's a huge issue.
That's the work.
Yeah.
That's the work, I think.
That is the work, yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I've noticed with a lot of people who do experiment with psychedelics and they'll do those things. They'll come back for a short time, they'll be somewhat transformed, and then, of course, life happens, and then they start falling back into old patterns.
Yeah.
And like you just said, transformation happens gradually and slowly over time.
Yeah.
And the more exposed to that, I think, is what's going to prolong that transformation.
Yeah.
Or at least elevate you to another level.
Yeah.
Where you just bring yourself up as opposed to going back to where you were before.
Yeah. Well, and Eckhart says, actually, in the New Earth, I think he talks about somebody asking him what course or program they should do in order to
continue that path.
To liberate themselves. And he said, if you do just several conscious breaths every day, that's more important than any course or experience you're going to have.
I think he said if you do 1 and 2 is even better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize, because you're right. People get encapsulated or enchanted by these peak experiences.
Yeah.
And you're not. I mean, I think it's important to learn that you're not going to have like this peak experience life all the time.
Right.
We are human.
Yeah.
And recognize the humanity of ourselves, and being able to work with what you have, and the long, slow and steady wins the race is kind of a daily practice of some form. And I think you spoke about this too, is like the importance of doing something regularly to do that, having some form of practice that you can work with. And it can be anything, literally anything.
Yeah, whatever it is for you. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So if you had a magic wand, you could just wave it, and you could solve all the problems that we're speaking about right now with humanity and the pain and the suffering and all that, what would that look like? What would you change? What would be the first thing that would need to be changed?
Well, of course, if it were that simple, then what would need to be changed is human consciousness. Like what if all of a sudden, from this minute to the next, whole of humanity attained Buddha consciousness, or Jesus consciousness, or Adyashanti consciousness, or Eckhart Tolle consciousness? What would happen? Well, all of a sudden, people would be who they are. They'd be full, they'd be alive, they'd be grateful, they would be insightful, they would be concerned only with truth, and nothing that wasn't true would in the least interest them. That means wars would end, exploitation would end, oppression would end,
homelessness,
aggressive competition would end. There'd be compassion, there'd be companionship, there'd be union. I mean, all that would happen. So you might say that, However, in other words, I wouldn't have to come up with a scheme to organize society.
Right. You would?
You would not have to come up with a scheme. How do we organize society? I mean, if we could all have that consciousness, which is certainly possible, because if it's possible for person A, it's also possible for person B. We wouldn't have to worry about how to organize anything. Things would just take care of itself, in the sense that we would take care of it in the way that they need to be taken care of. If on the political level, on the other hand, if I could wave that wand not on the level of personal consciousness, but of on a political or social level. That's a much more complicated question. Now, what would we do? But you know what I would do? If there's one thing I could do, it's not even what I just said about consciousness. I would just open people's eyes to actually see the truth of how things are.
Yeah.
They actually see the truth of things are. So when Israel is bombing the Gaza, I'd want them to see what they're actually doing, what the actual impact is, and who they're doing it to.
Yes.
That these people are just like them. When somebody in ISIS, this Islamic State, is about to cut off somebody's head, I want them to know that they're cutting off their own head.
Yes.
I want them to see the truth of what they're actually doing. When Canadians think about Canada and they stand at hockey games and they think they sing our home and native land, I want them to think about the natives on whose land this is actually happening.
Yeah.
And what their lives are actually like. If there was a wand I could wave, I want people to see the truth about themselves and everything. I mean, that's the thing that excites me most. Yeah. And if there's one thing that I suppose that I can acknowledge myself for, it's that in all my work, I keep looking for the truth of things. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't find it, but that's, when I'm in touch with my commitment, that's what it's to. So I think that the most exciting thing, now that I think of your question, is just, I would wake people up.
It would wake people up.
Yeah.
Now the question I also have, thinking, in terms of the internet and how that could be used as a tool for something like that. Now think about the influence of mainstream media, what we see, most people see on an everyday basis.
Right.
We have a huge mountain ahead of us, apparently, to get to that awakened state. How do we do that? A lot of people seem to not want to do that. A lot of people seem to be happy with the way things are. They're happy because they're comfortable.
No, they're not happy. There's very few
Ignorant.
happy. There's very few happy people around. It's more like they're content with it because they don't know any better, and because they're afraid of the alternatives. The sense of self is too fragile. I mean, when people don't want to know the truth threatens them. Now the media, I mean, if we're truthful about it, in any society, the dominant institutions are going to serve the interests of the people that dominate that society.
Yep.
So the media is not going to be a conveyor belt for truth. It's going to be a conveyor belt for an ideology that justifies the way things are. So, in a whole lot of areas, the very fact that it took this long, I mean, it seems to be, now that there's a consensus finally, at least among people who think about climate change. No serious person denies climate change anymore. But if you look at the media over the years, the arguments against climate change got far more attention than on scientific or intellectual grounds they ever deserved. I mean, nobody prints articles anymore about how the Earth is flat. Mm-hmm. But somebody would deny climate change, and there's still columnists in our major newspapers who are still fighting a rearguard battle. Or they say, well, okay, there's climate change, but there's the second line of defense is, first line of defense is there's no climate change. The second line of defense is there's climate change, but human beings are not causing it. Yeah. The third line is there's climate change, and we are causing it, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
Or the fourth line is there's climate change, we're causing it, there's something we can do about it, but it would create too much suffering if we tried to. Economically, we can't afford it. In other words, now, whose interest does that serve? Well, it so happens there's huge corporations who are profiting from the maintenance of economic structures and practices. Yeah. I was on the airplane the other day, and flying to Saskatoon, actually, and there was a very nice gentleman sitting next to me. We had a lovely talk, and we agreed on so many things, and how we see the world, the importance of connection for child rearing. It was just really lovely to get to know him. But he works for an agricultural company. Mm-hmm. So I have to ask him about is it GMOs?
Yeah. GMOs, yeah.
What does GMOs stand for?
Genetically modified
organisms.
Organisms,
okay, right, GMOs, yeah. So I asked him about GMOs, and he said, there's no truth to the fact that they pose any danger. The science is all
Sound.
nonsense, that would argue otherwise. They only increase production and health, and it's a great boon to humanity. Well, I have a lot of research on my computer that says otherwise, but I haven't looked at it, I haven't evaluated it, and so I didn't feel in a position where, look, I didn't want to debate with him anyway. But I said, well, what about just the simple issue of, at least if people have thought about it, shouldn't they have at least have the right to know which foods have GMOs and which foods do not?
Let them make a choice.
So they can just make a choice. I
Yeah.
mean, whether they make the right choice, whether they make the wrong choice, in every other area, in politics, we allow people to make all kinds of wrong choices because that's what it means to have freedom and democracy, supposedly. Although I would question what kind of democracy we have, and most people don't know about most things most of the time. But anyway, but even on that point, he had trouble agreeing with me. Now, what was that? He's working for a company. His life is invested in a business, and he's a really good guy. He's a good father. I can see he was a better father than I was in many ways. I'm not in any way superior to him. On the contrary, if we're going to compare areas of life and decency, and he belongs to a church, and they give money to the homeless, and just a really wonderful guy. But in this issue, where his own livelihood was concerned, and where his own activity was invested, he had great difficulty being intellectually clear. Even on the simple point of should people have the freedom. And he was arguing for the most part, no, they shouldn't because there's so much confusion. I said, well, okay, how many Canadians could tell you about Afghanistan? Like, why the heck were we in Afghanistan and we're killing people and our troops were dying? How many Canadians could give you a 2-minute lecture or exposition on the history of Afghanistan and what happened there? Of course, most Canadians haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
But we all have the right to vote on whether we send people to kill or die in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Why don't we have the right to decide whether
What
we
we're
can eat
eating.
GMOs or not? You know, we could be just as confused or ignorant. But he had intellectually had difficulty rejecting that point, but I could see he had also a great difficulty accepting it. And all I'm saying is that our thinking is so much conditioned by what we perceive to be our immediate self-interest.
Massive. We're completely subjective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that speaks a lot to people who get really tied into the whole science methodology, and science is objective, it's objective, it's objective. How can something be, and you spoke about this, so I'm not, how can it be objective if the scientist is a human being?
Yeah.
They're subjective.
Well,
It's like the science delusion, like what Rupert Sheldrake talks about and stuff like that.
Well, Hans Selye, who's the great Canadian researcher on stress, he said that we're always assuming that scientists are, neutral that way, but he said the actual assumptions of the scientist, the researcher, will very much define what the researcher is going to, researcher is going to conclude. Now, if we're aware of that, and if we're aware of our own biases, there's a lot we can do to stay objective.
Right.
But a lot of people, academics and so on, are completely unaware of what their biases are. As a result, what they find is what's already in their consciousness even before they know it.
Yeah.
So their unconscious assumptions will reinforce, and therefore you have this whole ideology industry that simply reinforces the implicit values of our society, which is controlled by a few, acquisitiveness, composition, and everything we've been talking about. And there are X number of books every year, and most of the media and most of the talk shows are filled with people who will promote that ideology, whether they know it or not.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, do you think that is partially why Health Canada would not allow you to continue with your, the ayahuasca treatments? Is because, in a sense, it's threatening to everything that the Canadian government, the system as a whole, is.
I don't think there's that much consciousness on their part.
Okay.
In other words, I don't think they see themselves as guardians of the system, and this is dangerous. A lot of it is just bureaucracy. There are certain laws which says that the ingredients in ayahuasca are illegal, therefore ayahuasca is illegal.
Yeah.
Even though they themselves, I'm talking about Health Canada, agrees that it's neither dangerous nor addictive. They've said so in so many words. It's just bureaucracy. Then this is the whole idea of what it means to do clinical studies. They thought I was doing a clinical study. I was not doing a clinical study.
Yeah.
You know, that's somebody sent them the wrong information.
Yes.
Right.
I think it's just bureaucrats doing their job. They don't actually, it's in the nature of bureaucracy not to think too much about ultimate purposes or real value or truth even. It's just about the observation of rules and regulations, you know. And so I think it was just an example of well-meaning bureaucrats doing their job. And I spoke to one of them, very friendly conversation. And when I tried to find out, well, what would it take to do a clinical study, we would love to support you doing a clinical study. You should have anything that's promising that, you know, we would be, you know, love to do, you know, make it possible for you. But when you actually find out what is needed, what would I have to do? I could do it. All I need is a few $1 million, you know, and infinite time, and then I could do the clinical study. In other words, if I was a pharmaceutical company,
It would be done
it
whenever
could be
you
done.
want.
You know, the problem, of course, with ayahuasca, it's not a pill that you give out. Nobody's going to make a huge profit off it, because we're talking about 3 experiences here or 1 experience there.
Yeah.
You're not going to market it.
Yeah.
There's no profit in it. So nobody's going to do a clinical study.
Well, maybe not in this country.
Well, not in any country where it's illegal. Because it would just be so expensive, and then you'd have to verify each batch. Now, you know, when you're a shaman,
It's not,
you don't know.
It's not 3 grams of this and 2 grams of that.
no, it's not like you've mixed
Yeah.
it in a lab and you've measured it and you've assayed it and you've computerized tested it. It's that he pours the drink with whatever concoction he's
Based
prepared
on
that day.
energetic properties.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
So I mean, so in other words, this stuff is just not amenable.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to figure. It's not amenable to the usual research approaches. So it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. They need to drop this idea that you can understand everything, or that it's even legitimate to try to understand everything only through the industrialized pharmaceutical techniques.
Right.
You know, especially when it comes to ceremonial practices. So the whole idea is nuts. You know, so I'm not going to waste my time trying to do that. I mean, I'm not going to live that long. You know.
Well, that's why you need to go to Peru.
Sorry.
Peru, that's
Yeah, you
sexual.
go, well, and
it's legal there. It's
and the truth is, people have ceremonies in North America as well.
yeah.
Just nobody puts it on the internet.
No, that's
you know,
true. It's
and-
very,
and
it's all underground and it's forced there.
yeah, it's forced underground, which also means it can't be regulated as well. Which also means that sometimes people are exploited. I mean, I know people who charge $200 for a ceremony, and then 50 people will get together and they put on CD music, and that's their idea of a ceremony.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not a ceremony.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question about that. If you put if there is a like amazing article spread around, going viral, or a video on the internet, and a lot of people in Canada figure out what ayahuasca really is and what the potentials are, how long would it take to change Health Canada's mind? Like,
Oh, it wouldn't make any difference at all.
okay,
It would not make any difference. Look, take something so simple as the war on drugs.
right,
So or something as obvious as Eastside, which is the supervised ejection site, just a few blocks away from where we're doing this interview. The evidence is in. Everybody knows about it. It makes no difference to the attitude of the Canadian government.
right.
None. They still want to shut the place down, if only they could. And when it comes to the drug laws, we have 50 years of accumulated evidence that A, they don't work, B, they make things worse, C, they create a lot of suffering. Do you think that has any impact whatsoever on government policy? Zilch. I mean, so that it's what we said earlier in this interview. Either people are open to the truth if they're not. If they're not, it's like seeds falling on fallow ground. They're just going to shrivel up and die. And so the truth alone will not free you. What will free you is that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall free you.
Yeah.
But before you should know the truth, you need to be interested in the truth. and being interested in the truth means you need to be willing to drop your assumptions, whatever they are. And so, you know, I think all 3 of us at some point, all 4 of us here around this table, at some point, painfully sometimes had to drop certain things we thought were
Yeah.
true. We had to realize, no, what I thought was not true. The willingness has to be there.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for people to do.
I think that it's probably more effective at this point, instead of going through millions of dollars and thousands of pages of red tape and documentation.
Yeah.
I think it's better to get information out there like this,
Yeah.
and affect people's lives, affect people's minds. I think that's probably the more efficient way to do it.
And incidentally, I mean, this Wednesday, just a few blocks away at SFU Harbor Center, Bia Labate, who's a Brazilian-born, Mexican-based researcher on ayahuasca, is talking about her most recent book
Yep.
on ayahuasca shamanism.
Yep.
And I've helped, and I've also contributed to another book that she's published on the therapeutic use of ayahuasca. So this stuff has been published already. It's documented. A lot of research has been done in other countries, but it's only available to people that are willing to look at it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, one thing is, even though we're kind of in these circles, these groups online and stuff, and in the community for real, we do see them growing.
Yeah.
And I know this week actually, Dr. Dennis McKenna is in town.
Is he? Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to be talking at Banyan Books for free, doing a book talk about his book about Terence McKenna, and then the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference is the week after.
Right.
So it's actually a pretty good time to.
The awareness seems to be growing. Have you ever heard of the author Graham Hancock?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's mentioned me in one of his.
He did. He's
massive
mentioned you.
talk. That
And,
talk was
which
gigantic.
was wiped off TED, right?
it was wiped off, but I think they put it back on.
Did they put it back on?
They did, yeah.
But it's in like some special place on the website. They call it the Naughty Boys Corner or something, because it's not part of their mainstream.
I see.
When you started talking about the war on drugs, that's
Yeah.
what he went off about in his
Yeah.
TED talk. And
The war on
some people didn't
consciousness.
like it. The war on consciousness, right?
Yeah.
It's an amazing talk. If anyone hasn't seen it, go Google, YouTube, the war on consciousness, and
I'm sorry to, it sounds like I'll miss Dennis because I'm leaving town this week for a speaking trip again. I'll be gone both when he's here, and I'll be gone both. I couldn't attend the Plant Spirit Conference this year either because I'll be away at another conference. But I'm glad that Dennis has finished his book on his brother. He's been working on it.
yeah, it's called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss.
Wow,
And-
what a title.
And it's about his life with Terence as a brother with Terence McKenna, and he's doing a free book talk at Banyan Books this Friday night, and I think he's in town all week, so we're gonna try to get him here as well. I'm gonna try.
Well, if you see him, give him my very best, would you?
I
We
will,
will.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll tell him.
I'm sorry. Tell him I'm sorry to miss him because I'll be out of town.
Yeah.
You can give him a little clip, and we can give him a message. That, hey, come on, Vancouver Real podcast.
Yeah,
Or
right.
you speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can use me that way. Yeah.
You said in your book, In the Realms of Hungry Ghost, between the discoveries of science, the teachings of the heart, and the revelations of the soul, all assure us that no human being is ever beyond redemption.
Right.
The possibility of renewal exists so long as life exists.
Yeah.
Working with those people that you have here on the downtown east side, looking at them in the eyes and hearing their stories, their pain, their suffering, like, and even with those people, you write that even they can be changed, if the proper attention and tools and
Right.
therapy is applied. Even the people that are literally what mainstream culture looks at as the garbage of humanity can be saved.
Yes.
You know?
And every once in a while, I run into somebody, and I actually not every once in a while, but reasonably frequently, where I travel and I speak over North America. And somebody will come up to me and say, and shake my hand and say, I was one of those people in that book.
Wow.
And now I'm living a fulfilled life. I'm helping others and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it just, as you say, it depends on the what are we able to offer them. It's very difficult for people, not totally impossible, but statistically unlikely that anybody transfers themselves purely from their internal resources. It's almost like something has to happen for them, that they have to be touched by grace, or they have to be touched by other people, and the environment has to support them somehow. Somebody has to come along to give them a different sense of themselves, of what's possible for them, of what truth is, of ways of alleviating their suffering that doesn't create more suffering, and that depends very much on what we offer them. And unfortunately, although the possibility is there, reality is not there for many of them because we don't offer them
Yeah.
those conditions.
Yeah, we live in a country that's perceivably one of the richest in the world, highest quality of living repeatedly over and over again, yet we have this massive imbalance and it's not even being addressed.
Watch that phrase, highest quality of living. Is it really,
Sure.
is it really the highest quality of living?
Well, voted, no, but, voted in mainstream cultural magazines and stuff like that and newspapers, but you're right. I mean, it's
I know,
bullshit.
but what they're looking at are some of the false values.
Sure, true.
Yeah. So if I talk about quality of life,
Yeah.
there's a friend of mine who actually helps out, and he's absolutely saintly beautiful at it. You might even want to interview him sometime. His name is Tony, and he assists at ayahuasca ceremonies, and that's what he does. He just comes, and he's just an angel-like presence.
Wow.
So he knows how to like doing a ceremony. He just knows what anybody at any one time needs, and he's just there to respond, and he just loves that work.
Really?
Tony is also a photographer, so he works on various non-profit projects in Africa, and often goes to Bangladesh. And he tells me that amidst all the poverty and so on, in Bangladesh he meets people that are much happier than the people that are here.
Interesting. Yeah.
So when we talk about quality of life, what are we measuring? Now, of course, the average Bangladeshi would love to have what we have. I don't want to romanticize poverty.
Sure.
All I'm saying is that in terms of true quality, is it true that we have the highest quality of life in the world?
Right.
And I would say, I understand exactly what you meant,
no, you're right.
but I think we have to think about that one.
Oh, I think that's a huge point to make. I think that, people, we need to redefine what a life potential can be.
Exactly.
And I think this is what a large part of your work is starting to highlight, is the human kind of potential. And it's actually not that we need to evolve to a higher place and grow up. Actually, it seems like we need to kind of strip away and I think your book, probably Toxic Culture, will probably address this very well.
There's a book I read called Memoirs of an Addicted Brain, in which a neuroscientist talks about his own addictions, but he also talks about being in somewhere, I think Malaysia, or anyway, he's in this jungle, and he comes across his father and son, and he's got this beautiful description of two people in a natural state, completely comfortable in their own skins, and he's looking at them with envy.
Yeah.
He's got all this education and all this resources, and he's never accepted himself as he perceives these two people accept themselves. He's never had that sense of security and belonging and just being that he sees in these two people. It's a beautiful description. I often quote it. And so in response to what you just said, I agree with you. It's not a question of, and this is the part I'd love to have a conversation with Eckhart Tolle, because he talks about evolution to a higher level of consciousness. Well, I know what it means, because those people in that jungle, they have that sense of being, but they're not conscious of it.
Right.
So when the Western modalities come along, offer them trinkets and beads and cell phones, they're going to go for it.
Right.
Because they're going to see that as an advantage.
Yes.
So then Eckhart talks about a higher level of consciousness. But in a certain sense, that higher level of consciousness will take us back to where people have already been.
Right.
That being.
Yeah.
It's just that they weren't conscious of it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you gotta, kind of, I like questioning, looking at the big picture of the whole thing, is like the whole agricultural and industrial revolutions, and now the information revolution. Maybe it has some greater purpose. Maybe it is something to, at first we had to go through this ignorant kind of state to unite the global population,
Right.
and then go to that, maybe it is the next level, maybe it is that next stage.
I think that's a great way of looking at it, and I think it's how history works. It's we can't skip history.
Right.
Whenever people tried in a utopian way or in a forcible revolutionary way to create something more beautiful, invariably they fail, because you can't skip natural evolution. You can't skip history. You can't. You can't run ahead of the evolution of consciousness.
Right. Timothy Leary described it as used a metaphor metamorphosis.
Yeah.
That history is a kind of metamorphosis or a birthing process. It's
Yeah.
painful. There might be pain. There might be
Yeah.
discomfort, and then it has a potential to give birth to a new paradigm. And
who said
that? Timothy Leary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a guy who had a lot of insight, and it was also completely
Exactly.
separated from his insights in
Sure.
some very deep ways. But it's so often true that these amazing minds come up with wonderful teachings, but they can't catch up to their own teachings.
Yeah. But at least, I mean, I think every human being has something they can contribute to the universal whole, and it's just, I think that I look at humanity as now like a global organism, and I believe the properties that permeate our individual cellular-like bodies of neuroplasticity. If we keep firing the memes and the thoughts that we're feeling as a higher truth, just keep firing that neuron. If we're all individual neurons, eventually different connections will be made, and they are being made. It's very physically happening. It's
And you
just
see it
completely
online.
analogous.
You see it on Facebook,
Yeah.
right?
So
and I
these-
think, was it Terrence McKenna who said, spread the meme? I think it
Yeah,
was.
and just keep firing it, and that's all we can do. And it takes time. I mean, I think we have to respect the ingredient of time, and
I also think what's happening is that, and we referred to this earlier, as the contradictions of the society become more and more clear, and as life becomes actually more difficult for a lot of people, there's just a search for truth. I mean, so that the more falsehood there is, the more people are seeking the truth. So that it's like Karl Marx talked about how each society creates inside its own belly the forces that eventually will transform it.
sure.
Interesting.
And so that's happening. And so this consciousness that's spreading that you're describing is not just the product of the consciousness spreading and then causing other people to be enrolled with it. It's also the real conditions of people's lives are getting more difficult and more contradictory, and that's inducing more and more people to search for some truth in their lives.
It's interesting too. I think with the spread of that, just the proliferation of things like yoga, for example, and mindfulness meditation. Eckhart Tolle going on Oprah and doing webinars.
That's right.
Spreading the kind of message. Businesses like Floathouse. This is
Right.
along those lines. We're giving people that meditative, introspective type experience. There's now like a market for that. There's people actually seeking this, and I think that kind of speaks to the shifting of things.
And serious academic study.
Yep.
And books being published on the neuroscience of mindfulness, and conferences, and very reputable scholars talking about it. I mean, who would have thunk?
Yeah.
Just a few decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even one decade ago.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, you're too young. It was it was around. It's not like we've come up. Like people like Yogananda who came from India in the 1930s, and his particular yoga, and so there's always been in fact, if you even in the 19th century. But in other words, the cross-fertilization, particularly the fertilization of the Western mind with Eastern mindfulness and yogic teachings, it didn't just begin, but no question that it's becoming much more broadly disseminated and appreciated than it ever used to be.
I think a point where it can get kind of muddy is with religions, and how people are probably having mystical, spiritual, personal, empowering experiences, but within a religious context and dogma and group. And although their individual experiences are probably benefiting them in one way or another, but since they have such a strong connection, Jesus and God is this and that, and I think the language gets really distorted. Language starts to really hinder our ability to communicate effectively. He could be talking about the exact same thing, but because he's talking about it in the words of Jesus and God and the Holy Ghost in the Bible, someone else, as soon as they hear that, they're gonna that's bullshit.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works. What is true, what is really interesting is that people can talk about Jesus and fully believe what they're saying, and fully. By the way, I like to call him Yeshua. That was his actual name. Jesus is sort of a.
Is that the?
Jesus is an English pronunciation of the Greek.
Sure.
Whereas
A J is an H.
whereas he spoke Aramaic, so his name was actually Yeshua.
I'm not even saying his name.
We'll now
right.
refer to him as Heshua from this point on.
and all his disciples with these English names, like Mark, his name was Mark. His name was Marcus. It was a Greek name, and John would be Jonathan, and these Aramaic, Hebraic, sometimes Greek names of that time. So we've anglicized the New Testament, which is an interesting process itself. We kind of made it into an Aryan, non-Jewish document by de-Judaizing the names of the people that are actually active in it. Like Matthew is Matatyahu, not Matthew.
Yes.
Anyway, to go back to Yeshua then, how people can quote him and cite him, and some people will actually, who've touched that core of love inside themselves, or if you like, inside the universe, will just recognize the teaching of compassion and acceptance and love that Yeshua embodied. And then some people will invoke his name in the most vindictive and narrow and controlling fashion. And I'm not so worried about the people that have had real experiences of the essence of what might be called Yeshua consciousness or Jesus consciousness. I don't mind how they talk about it,
Right.
because they're going to talk about it in a way that comes from truth.
Right.
It's more that so often the people that talk about him or his teachings are embodying the very opposite of what the teaching was really all about.
Oh, totally.
And it's so confusing for people.
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
so confusing for people. And,
Yeah.
and then you have a lot of people who then, it's interesting because I'm Jewish, and I'm often quoting Yeshua, but there's many people brought up Christian who are uncomfortable with that because when they were kids, they were beaten over the head in the name of Jesus.
And that's probably where it stems from. They were raised in a church.
Yeah.
It's been ingrained into them
Yeah,
ever since they were a child, and that's their belief system.
Absolutely. So that you might say that one of the roles of organized religion has been to totally destroy the actual teachings of the founders.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't be unusual actually.
Which makes you kind of question the church as a whole and what they're actually doing.
Well, or what the actual role of an organized religion is. You know, I mean, is it in Myanmar right now? You have so-called Buddhists killing Muslims. Now, how far is that from the actual teaching of Buddha? Now, Buddhists on the whole have not been as violent as Christians have been, but they have been part of violence, and so just the opposite of what the Buddha ever talked about,
Well, that's
And
why-
even the whole idea of monuments and statues of the Buddha is something that he said, don't do this. So as soon as you have organized religion, you end up doing the opposite of what the founders actually taught.
Yeah.
That's why I really like Eckhart Tolle's teachings in his book.
Yeah.
I think it's Buddhism in a non-religious form.
It's not secular. It's yeah, that's right. It is. I mean, he says in very modern language, contemporary language.
Yeah.
But without compromising. It's a very deep teaching.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's no religion. There's no belief attached to it.
Yes.
And there wasn't any belief attached to Buddha either. When you actually look at his words.
It's true, and then I think a lot of Buddhist religions, that a lot of the people who practice Buddhism actually believe enlightenment is only for the Buddha, which is not exactly what his message was. And it kind of shows you how religion changes the message.
Well, again, we see that phenomena. I think at the core, and I think Eckhart says this in The New Earth, that at the core of any new religious teachings, there's a deep experience of truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then you have Moses, or Moshe, having the encounter with the burning bush.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he turns aside from his daily activities, and then he experiences truth. And this is a flame that gives light, but it doesn't consume, doesn't destroy anything, which is what truth does.
Right.
You know,
Light.
and so you have that experience, and within a couple of chapters in the Old Testament, or what the Jews call the Torah, you have the same God commanding genocide.
It's that conflict of interest, right? It's saying,
Yeah.
you know, be good to your fellow man, but you know, now we're going to go and kill a bunch of people.
Well, you know, so already the experience of unity that Moshe has is no longer present. You know, it has been forgotten, and now we're making other people into others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are identifying with a certain tribal or cultural entity, and everybody else is another. And,
It's the us
of
versus
course,
them
and of course,
mentality.
all these years later, we're still doing it.
Yes. Yeah. I think Graham Hancock actually says something interesting about the burning of the bush.
Yeah.
He talks about it actually. That's a whole nother podcast potentially, but he talks about how that bush actually might have contained DMT, and actually might have given him a psychedelic experience, and it's all like a metaphor for that. But
Well,
who knows?
there's probably no doubt that a lot of those religions may have had some plant experiences at their core. I don't know; it's hard to prove, but I've heard that elsewhere, and it makes a certain amount of sense. But of course, let's not be, and certainly in the oracle at Delphi, it likely was on some herb or another. But of course, let's not reduce it to herbs or DMT, because we have DMT in our own brains.
It's true.
And the God molecule, you know, and there are people, we've talked about them, like Buddha or like Eckhart, and many others, nameless ones, who've had these experiences without any external substance. They got in touch with something. So it's not, I don't want to create kind of a romance around plants or substances as being the only way. Ultimately, they're not. And people have had those realizations, those peak experiences,
Through many modalities.
quite without any
Yeah.
external substances.
Actually, I want to ask you, being, let's draw back to your medical doctor,
Yeah.
and then also with all the research you've done, with all the avenues and topics you've covered. There's a lot of crap out there about the pineal gland, and it's like people say it's calcified, and like the water we drink and all that crap. Have you, from your professional opinion, is that stuff kind of malarkey?
I don't have a professional opinion. I could, the things I don't know about the pineal gland could fill volumes, you know?
Right.
So I had no comment whatsoever. I have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, I have no idea
Okay.
what it is that they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I want to know what research is this based on. Like, how do you know these things?
Yeah.
And I often read that stuff and I say, okay, well, fair enough. How do you know this?
Yeah, it's true. You haven't. There's no real official documentation out there about that stuff.
Yeah, so I don't. So that's why I don't know.
But the entire, like Rick Strassman's DMT, the Spirit Molecule book and documentary. Were you in that documentary as well?
Not the spirit molecule, no.
You should be. But that was have you seen it or read the book?
No. I have the spirit molecule at home, but I've never read it.
It's great. I mean,
Yeah.
it was very interesting. It was the first approved psychedelic research project in the U.S. since the LSD experiments, apparently.
Okay.
Which is pretty profound, the fact that, because DMT being such a strong thing, and they ended up injecting it intravenously, which is, but I guess they wanted to make it as clinical as possible.
Which is brave.
Extremely brave.
Or
So
foolhardy, whatever.
the book, starts out in this very, research scientific, they're trying to just get baseline biological measurements.
Yeah.
But then it morphs into this. He starts talking about the experiences of the people, and
Right.
it's fascinating. Really, It's really fascinating. And the documentary is a good synopsis of it, but the book is much more detailed.
Okay.
And actually, it kind of starts to talk into, the cave paintings and the shamanic arts of our primitive ancestors.
Yeah.
they actually start depicting visions on the cave walls. And Graham Hancock's book Supernatural has a whole argument about this. And do you see the shamanic arts, in our kind of potential projection of how we would like our society to evolve? Do you see the shamanic arts having an important role in that, potentially?
Well, this last month, there was a big international conference on ayahuasca in Ibiza, Spain, and there were 400 people there from around 40 different countries. So it's true that in the north, and what you might call the west and the north, the northern world and the western world, there's an increasing interest in shamanic culture and shamanic teachings. And more people are going to events like sun dancing and so on, whose tradition doesn't have that, doesn't contain those modalities, but they're interested in it anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think as the emptiness of Western life becomes more and more apparent, there's much more interest in more basic, primal teachings of peoples that were much more connected to the earth and nature and the awareness of a greater truth, than our culture is.
Yeah.
How big an impact that's all going to have, I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah. Like you kind of said, it's it's another tool. It's another tool, right?
It's another tool, and it's another influence, and certainly, it's touched my life significantly.
Well, and I see your not that, I don't know how you want to term it, but your position, it's a very important one to have, the fact that you have your background and the research you've done and the experiences you've had. There's a lot of people, I would say, in your age bracket who are not as open as you are.
Who are dead.
Right. Well, they know the truth, so.
Yeah, they're already figured it out.
They already figured it out.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. But let's just say, I see you as a massive bridge potential for science and spirituality, for young and old, because you've embraced, you've just been open. Period. Yeah. And I think that your role here, and I'm so glad that you tirelessly keep working towards what you're doing, and potentially at your self-sacrifice, which we need to try to fix.
There's any sacrifice is a false one. In other words, if I do it, it's not for the right reason. So that's what we were talking about before. But my wife and I were watching a little film on Noam Chomsky called "Is the Man Who's Tall Happy?" It's made by a French filmmaker who, most of it is in the form of cartoons. It's a conversation with Noam Chomsky. And Chomsky talks about for science to move forward, there's the willingness to be puzzled.
Absolutely.
The willingness to be puzzled. In other words, being puzzled means that you don't know.
Yeah.
You're actually puzzled. It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
When you have a puzzle, you don't know the answers. If you know the answer, it's not a puzzle.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I've been fortunate in that I've, for whatever reason, and not always and not consistently, but by and large, I've been willing to be puzzled.
It's a curiosity.
It's that curiosity and that openness. And again, I could allow myself to be puzzled more often than I am, but if we never allow ourselves to be puzzled, we just don't move forward. And as long as we are willing to be puzzled, then learning is a lifelong adventure. So age actually doesn't much come into it. Yeah. And I think probably that's what makes my work effective with a whole lot of the generations. It's just that, there's that willingness to ask the question, what's really going on here?
Yeah.
What's really going on here? And if only people would keep asking themselves that, what's really going on here? Instead of assuming that we know and that the explanations that we've been given by society or our parents or anybody may not contain either the truth or the full truth. If more people were going to be puzzled all the time, we'd have a much more fluid society.
Well, being who you are with your background and author and everything, I think it's so important, the work and the message that you're spreading. I think that it's probably not an easy one either. I'm sure you face ridicule at times about the things you say.
Actually, you know what? That's never an issue for me.
It's never an issue?
No.
Well,
it's never an issue.
Yeah.
If it is, it's only an issue for my ego, but not for me.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And first of all, I don't get a lot of ridicule. I get some disagreement, which is great. Sometimes I get hostility, which I tend not to respond to. If somebody's hostile, they have an issue. There's a guy who blogs on Psychology Today who, for some reason, finds it necessary to keep attacking me. I don't know what it is. I could speculate.
Maybe because you're threatening a belief he has.
Well, that's for sure. But who knows? Who knows what else?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is I don't respond to that kind of stuff. There's somebody right now who's in a rehab facility, a rehab program here in British Columbia. I'll mention it. It's called Edgewood. Now, generally, I've always supported Edgewood. I think they're a reasonable program as far as I know about it.
What is Edgewood?
It's a rehab facility where people pay fairly big bucks, but to rehab from drugs
Alcoholism and drugs?
Drugs. Yeah, it's addiction.
Okay.
And so there's a guy there who wants to come to one of our ayahuasca retreats.
Okay.
After he finishes at Edgewood. Edgewood was saying to him that he should stay longer at Edgewood and not come to the ayahuasca retreat. Which, if that's how it is, that's fine with me, So I sent him an email, a very polite email, saying, I understand you don't think so-and-so should attend our retreat. Here's the information about a retreat, and here's the information about ayahuasca and how it may help addictions, and we've had some good results with it. But I'm not writing to enroll you in supporting our modality. I just want to have a conversation with you, because if you tell me that there's some strong reasons why this man should not leave your facility just now and come to the retreat, I want to advise the family of that.
Yes.
If you don't convince me of that, I'm not going to tell him to come to a retreat. I'm just going to leave it totally up to him.
Right.
Well, I heard back through the family that not only will they not talk with me, they will not even acknowledge receipt of my... they received it, but they're not going to write back to acknowledge it.
Wow.
They won't even write back to say, sorry, we can't talk to you, or we don't wish to speak to you.
Wow.
Now, what does that tell me? I can only speculate.
Right.
Like, what does it take to write an email saying, sorry, but for such and such a reason, we have chosen not to speak with you? That's fine. So that to me is, it's like on the ego level, it rankles, like, how can you ignore me, such an important person,
Right.
That's what the ego wants to say,
Exactly.
But on another level, it's not about me at all. It's just about them. And it also means I've now lost some respect for that place.
Sure.
Because I'd want to be, if I'm going to refer people and people ask me, is this a good place or not? I'm going to say, well, yeah, they have a pretty good program, but they also seem pretty uptight. And they don't seem to communicate very well. They don't. Communication is not something they're willing to do if something happens that they may not agree with. Right. So you know what I mean? It's like there's that ego response.
Sure, yeah.
But on a deeper level, it's not about me, and it's their issue.
And if they, if they're a rehab center, you would think that they would listen to not only your work, but all the kind of modern work that's coming out about addiction and different treatments. Not that ayahuasca is the only way, but it's showing really good success rates.
And it may even be that for this particular client, that is not the appropriate thing to do right now.
Sure.
And I'm quite open to listen to that. All I'm saying is that this question of hostility or indifference or ridicule, it's much more about whoever's generating that than about the target.
Yeah.
So that's
Absolutely.
why. So that's why it just doesn't concern me.
Yes.
It just doesn't concern me. And I know, it happens every once in a while.
I mean, almost what do they feel threatened by the potential of these, of ayahuasca or whatever, to preserve their own interest, or
possibly?
What's your point? What is their whole goal?
That'd be purely speculating, right? We don't know.
And I wouldn't even speculate on what their motives are. All I'm saying is, whatever it is their stuff.
Definitely.
So I'm not
Totally.
gonna, you know.
And it could be just bureaucracy in their organization as well.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. Right. But
Wow.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think we've held you here long enough.
Okay.
Dr. Maté. I think we got you talking more than almost 2 hours. So we did
Did we?
pretty good.
Wow.
Oh, good.
That's amazing.
I'm glad I put 2 hours into my parking meter then.
I know, I was thinking
That's a
about
good
that as well.
they're pretty. They're hawks down here.
Yeah.
They'll get you.
Yeah, I know.
But you know, I think I speak for all three of us, and for everyone that maybe has listened to your work or in one shape or form. Thank you for the work that you do and
Yes,
your
thank you.
consistent drive with it. It's phenomenal stuff. It's super important for society as a whole, and we're honored to be able to help spread this talk a little bit further. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And perhaps you might mention my website as to where people
Absolutely.
can connect.
So your website is drgabormaté.com?
Yeah, www.doctor, yeah.
Okay, so your website for any speaking engagements,
Speaking
your
engagements,
books.
my books, articles I've written, YouTube lectures, videos, and so on. It's all there.
We'll make a big write up, and it'll be in the links
yeah.
and everything like
Okay,
that.
great. Yeah.
Where are you? When are you speaking next in Vancouver? Do you have anything lined up?
I don't think I do this fall. I'm heading off to Newfoundland on Thursday and then to New York right after that. And
Okay.
next week, there's going to be the reason I can't be at the Plant Spirit conference is because there's this science and non-duality conference in San Jose not this coming, but the weekend after. Then there's a few more places, and then I go and lead my retreats with ayahuasca. And then after that, I'm going to take a sabbatical to write my book. So I have engagements coming up, but not that many next year because I really want to stay and write my book.
Yep.
All that information is at my website
Perfect.
on the speaking events page.
Great. So everyone check out drgabormaté.com for all the information in his regard. He's also got a Facebook page, so go like that. I'm sure it's a good feed that you can kind of stay up to date with speaking engagements and projects coming out. I think we're all in agreement. We're highly anticipating your next book, Toxic Culture.
Yeah.
If that's the title you keep with, I think that's
Yeah.
going to be fantastic. So do you have any rough timeline when that could be
Well, here's my problem with
published?
that book. I think it's a great idea. I haven't convinced myself that it's a great book yet.
Oh, it would be.
I think it could be a great book.
I think it'd be an amazing book.
Well, I'd have to somehow, you know what, and it goes back to our earlier conversation. Thank you for that. Every time somebody tells me that, and people tell me that all the time, it helps to motivate me. But really, I have to sit down with it. I have to give myself the space.
Yes.
You know, and really not be traveling and speaking and doing anything for anybody else. I have to really be with myself and see what emerges. And I'd rather trust that the idea wouldn't have come to me if it wasn't worthy. But for all the fact that the publishers want it, and so many people think it's a good idea, I don't know yet. I truly do not know yet.
Yeah.
And I won't know until I allow myself the space to experience it.
Well, there's a quantum physicist named Dr. Gamit Swami,
Okay.
and he speaks about creativity,
Yeah.
and he calls it the doobie-doobie-doo theory,
Okay.
where first you have to do, and then you have to be to create.
Right.
And so you want to be, and obviously, you know, when you're back in December, you need that space. We're always here for you, and you're welcome anytime.
Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Dr.
Thank you so much.